The Trump administration continues to show that it has only one mode of operation, which is to bully. Two separate issues, one thing in common. First, just today we discovered the extent of the norm-breaking intimidation and threats that were levied against delegates at the International Maritime Organisation as they were looking to decide a carbon tax on shipping recently. Veterans of the meetings said the entire organisation had been left in a state of complete shock at the Trump antics, saying it's like dealing with the mob. And two, that became public on the day that President Trump decided he was deeply concerned about killings of Christians in Nigeria, but that his way of responding to that wasn't going to be to offer help to the government in stopping such attacks. No. Instead, the peace president posted publicly that he was instructing the Department of War to prepare an attack plan for potentially going into Nigeria, quote, all guns blazing. And because this is all about performative public gestures, the Secretary Pete Hegseth posted his response back online and then went on to post an utterly bizarre piece of video propaganda showing the might of the United States military while Pete Hegseth himself recited the Lord's Prayer. Remarkably immune to the self-parody of talking about forgiving those who trespass against you, while showing that, no, in this version of Christianity, you can forget about turning the other cheek. No, Jesus goes all out to kick ass. For anyone who is under the misapprehension that with the trade war with China now on pause, most other countries having achieved some sort of trade agreement, that maybe at this point, the United States would begin to behave like a normal country. That has all been shattered. Day in, day out from this point on, the US government is going to be throwing its weight around wherever in the world it feels it can. So let's talk quickly about the International Maritime Organisation issue before then coming on to Nigeria. You'll remember we talked about this one as it was about to happen. And at that point, almost all the countries involved were clear that despite the United States' disapproval, they were going to vote for the introduction of the carbon tax of sorts for international shipping. Then the next day, suddenly the vote was put back for a year, which had been the United States' fallback position. Well, it turns out that turnaround was achieved by the US, quote, ripping up normal global diplomacy rules and using bully boy tactics. A squadron of US officials intimidated and threatened delegations, particularly but not exclusively from African and small Pacific and Caribbean island countries, into dropping their support for the proposal. They approached them during coffee breaks to tell them that if they voted the wrong way, they would not be able to transit via the United States in future. They and their families wouldn't be able to get into the United States. A diplomat from one of the threatened nations told the FT it was like the New York street. They went from delegation to delegation, threatening them, telling them to go back and speak to their capitals, warning what would happen if they didn't change their mind. He added, it's like dealing with the mob. They don't need to tell you exactly what they're going to do to you, just to make it clear there will be consequences. Threats were also delivered to the governments at home, with formal diplomatic protests from the American embassies in countries such as Bangladesh and Japan and Indonesia. These were delivered directly to the heads of government. The FT said that one such protest that it had had sight of included threats of hitting the country with additional trade tariffs, increasing fees on their ships when they docked at US ports, and refusing US visas to the crew members of such ships. Creon Butler from the foreign policy think tank Chatham House said this approach would likely backfire. In the very short term this might work, but in the medium term it increases the chances that non-US countries will conclude they cannot work with the US, making agreements independently amongst themselves which simply work around the US. At that point, I guess Trump could still threaten to invade them. I mean, having dropped bombs on oil-rich Iran and massed troops with a view to potential actions against oil-rich Venezuela, Trump is now instructing his military to plan for an attack against oil-rich Nigeria. If only there was some common feature in all of those that might help to explain these actions. I mean, I'm stumped, but there must be something. Anyway, President Trump posted this on social media. If the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria. Now, having already cancelled over $600 million of aid thanks to dismantling USAID, I can't imagine that doing so for the final $32 million of aid, which seems to be what's left, really going to be that definitive? Hence the next part, I guess. And may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns are blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. I am hereby instructing our Department of War to prepare for possible action. If we attack, it will be fast, vicious and sweet, just like the terrorist thugs attack our cherished Christians. And then the traditional all caps ending, warning, the Nigerian government better move fast. It's worth noting that amongst the financial support the US had been providing to Nigeria was included $7.6 million that was earmarked to help Nigeria strengthen its security capabilities. According to Nigeria's Punch website, that money is amongst the bulk of the support that was cancelled by Trump. But then there's a reason why Trump isn't quietly offering to support the Nigerian government in stopping the violence, but instead noisily and publicly threatening them with retribution if they don't act. And it's all to do with the projection of American power abroad. There's no evidence, particularly, that Trump cares about the fate of Nigerians, whether they're Christian or Muslim or anything. But recent events provide an excuse to push American interference into the most populous African nation in a way that will provoke a negotiation and pressure on the Nigerians to agree to something. This is the point. Trump and his administration don't want to support Nigeria to solve their problem. They want to use that problem as leverage to force Nigeria to give Trump what he wants, just as soon as he's worked out what that might be. Now, that doesn't mean he's not seizing on something that is indeed a real problem. While groups like Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa Province have used violence against numerous groups over the last couple of decades, often indeed against groups of other Muslims, nevertheless, attacks on Christians specifically have been increasing since around 2020, with assassinations and abductions of church leaders, massacres at churches and wider violence in areas with predominantly Christian populations. That has led some to use the language of Christian genocide, which is the sort of high-stakes framing that plays particularly well to Trump and to Trump's base and enables him to line his generally war-averse coalition up behind his actions. In recent months, it's been echoed by MAGA figures like Senator Ted Cruz, who claimed last month that the Nigerian government might be complicit in the violence. This led Trump to claim that Christianity was facing, quote, an existential threat in Nigeria. Now, while the attacks are serious, and they are horrible, that is something of an unhinged take, given that Nigeria has over 100 million Christians, making it more or less evenly split between that group and Muslims. But it's not as though Trump uses words according to anything we would recognise as traditional meanings. Trump's threats have received a mixed review within Nigeria more widely. Some of the most determined critics of the government there are delighted that Trump is putting pressure on it to take more effective action. For example, human rights lawyer Inabi Effiong welcomed Trump's move, saying that the killings had gone on for too long. He said this: if this is what it would take for the Nigerian government to wake up to its primary responsibility, so be it. Others, however, were reflecting that Trump was using the issue to market himself for his own benefit, not to actually help Nigeria. Human rights activist Omoyele Sowore said, whether you are Christian, Muslim, animist or non-religious, no one should celebrate such rhetoric. The United States and its allies have a long record of military interventions that leave nations more unstable than before. The Nigerian government has lost no time trying to deflect this latest initiative to try to turn it into something more cooperative and useful. So a presidential spokesman said that Nigeria would welcome United States assistance to fight terrorism, so long as it did so in a way that respected Nigeria's territorial integrity. President Bola Tinubu had previously pushed back against the MAGA claims of religious intolerance in Nigeria. He is now expected to meet President Trump for talks in the next few days or weeks, which rather opens up a possibility of yet another Oval Office struggle session, with a leader being harangued for what can turn out to be utterly fictitious attacks. Worth noting that Nigeria was one of a number of African countries that had 15% tariffs slapped on them by President Trump. Some African countries escaped those measures, ones that had engaged and negotiated some sort of arrangement with the Trump administration, but Nigeria was one of those that did not engage, simply swallowed the tariff, presumably because it's not as though America is going to be growing its own cocoa or its own cashew nuts anytime soon. Well, now the oil-rich country with significant reserves of rare earth minerals and a comprehensive existing strategic partnership with America's main rival, China, may find that it's in the crosshairs regardless. If Trump can't get it to the table to discuss some of those factors in one way, well, he's very capable of finding another. And here we are. Now, does he really intend to invade? Well, I seriously doubt it. But by outrageously threatening to do so, he puts himself at the centre of attention once again, which is where he likes to be. He gains credit amongst his base as the champion of Christians everywhere. And by threatening something that the country's president seriously doesn't want to see happen, he hopes to use the leverage of the power of that threat to get more of those shiny things that he does want. Actually, sending troops into Nigeria with a massive network of jihadists in opposition, that would be exactly the sort of open-ended engagement Trump seriously has no stomach for. So these two items, the IMO agreement and Nigeria's security situation, they live in very different realms. The common factor is hard to ignore. The US is not interested in partnerships, not the slightest prepared to play by norms or any sort of rules. It will threaten and bully as a method of first resort. It will threaten and bully diplomats. It will threaten and bully heads of state and governments, backed by the threat of lethal force wherever it considers that to be appropriate, regardless of what the rest of the world thinks about it. Well, right now, yeah, it's working. But if anyone thinks this is going to change anytime soon, they're kidding themselves. Sooner or later, whoever you are, whichever issue or national interest may end up provoking the response from Donald Trump, it will become your turn. And if you cave that first time, there'll be a second time, and a third time. You'd have to say that the sooner the nations of the world establish how they can do that whole thing of working around the US, making themselves less vulnerable to the bullying, the better it will be for everyone.